Hey everyone. Today we're going to be touching on a subject that we're all very much familiar with. And I'm going to be referencing an article out of the Washington Examiner by Susan Venker. And she's touched on some very important points. And when it comes to this stuff in regards to feminism, it's great to have some females, some women out there that are willing to step up and talk about these issues, this particular issue themselves, because, you know, when us men do it, then, you know, you get the political propagandists or the ideologues that'll constantly point out, oh, well, you just hate women. Oh, you hate women. Meanwhile, it's hilarious because most of us men, including myself, yeah, we're kind of real big fans of women, to be honest with you. You know, I love my wife. You know, we've been together 28 years. If you could ask me who's the most important figure throughout the history of my 47 years of existence, I would say it's my grandmother. My dad was very important too, but I lost him at a very early age. But you know, I've had a close relationship with my mother. I was surrounded by I have my mother and four other aunts. My whole life, I was constantly surrounded by women, and I love each and every one of them. So when people like myself, or men, when people like us, when we talk about feminism, it's the ideology, not the fact that they're women. It's the ideology, just like when I talk about collectivism, socialism, communism. It's about the idea, not particular individuals. It's about the concept, the idea, and what's wrong with the idea or the ideology. It's not that I hate all women. Or it's not like I hate people that want to help out the working class or the laborers. Hello, I spent a lot of my life being part of the working class, the blue collar class, right? It's just a matter of being reasonable as far as I'm concerned. I look through things and when I study them in enough depth and I come to understand what everything means, it's just, after that, it's just a matter of being, hey, logically and morally consistent. Which is why I reject collective ideologies, because all collective ideologies, whether it's fascism, socialism, communism, hey, feminism, they're all about trying to stereotype people. Now, it's not just a matter of stereotyping, because that's normal. That's something we all do. But then turn that into a dogmatic belief and ideology, and then make that a part or representation of government, which is the gun in the room. So it's a means to impose your preferences and your will on others. That's where I draw the line. You know, you can be all for it. You know, you can be a feminist, you can be a socialist, a communist, a fascist, like have that kind of preference in your mind. But when you try to translate that into government policy and how we all cohabitate and coexist, well, that's where I take issue. That's always, I have no problem, like for women that want to promote just women's rights, got no problem with that at all. But when you try to turn it or pivot towards the political realm, like I said, because government is a representation of the monopoly of force and violence in any particular geographical landmass. So if you want to impose that by means of force or threats of violence, that's where the problems arise, and that's where communications tend to break down. Anyways, headline for this particular article, and it is an opinion piece: feminists are to blame for the plight of boys and men. On his program, Tucker Carlson Tonight, Carlson and his team gave men in America a voice every Wednesday in March. It is only the beginning of a much-needed conversation, but it was a great start. I can't think of anyone in the media other than Carlson who's courageous enough to tackle this sensitive topic. He covered many, many facts about the plight of boys and men with sincere interest each Wednesday, and afterward interviewed a different expert to discuss the problems he just described. But it was in the final segment that Carlson honed in on why Americans are oblivious to this crisis. America has changed completely. The patriarchy is gone. Women are winning. Men are failing. Men in America are now far more likely to die of a drug overdose, drop out of the workforce because of an addiction, commit a felony and go to prison. They fail in school much more often than women do. They kill themselves at many times the rate. Overall, they die years younger Those numbers are not speculative. They are hard data gathered over decades by nonpartisan researchers. You'd have to ignore a huge amount of settled science in order to repeat the pieties of 1970s era feminism, and yet this is exactly what our leaders continue to do. And a perfect example, that just harkens me back to an old saying. I forget who it was. I'm not exactly sure who to quote, but it basically goes along the lines, I guess I'm paraphrasing here, is if you want to know who rules over you, look at who you can't insult. And I mean, come on, folks. You know damn well men are the go-to source for all insults, especially if you're a white man. So men, I mean, come on, if men are truly in power, who would be bold enough to constantly, like the media, all these leftist media hacks, or the political pundits, or the politicians, or the ruling class, they're all pointing the finger at men as being terrible, you know, disgusting, vile human beings, and we're all what? I don't know, patriarchal, violent thugs that just, you know, rape women every day, treat everyone else like the LGBT community or minority groups. Like, we're just the most vile, despicable people on the planet. That is a narrative that you're seeing out there propagated throughout the airwaves, on the internet, and through the established media outlets. That's something you see on a continuing basis, and nobody's seemingly feeling any fear or sense of reprisal for doing so. But yet, if you dare to say anything towards feminists or some of these other special interest groups that are now lobbying government to assume more power, more control over the masses, that's where you're seeing where all the pushback's coming. You know, you're hearing like these idiots, these ideologues are even trying to suggest people like Jordan Peterson, a very well-respected, decent, upstanding human being that identifies as a classical liberal, that, you know, is a professor in a university in Toronto, in Ontario, like leftism central in Canada, basically. But they're trying to paint him for even daring to speak outside of their political ideology or their dogmatic beliefs. Anyone that challenges their orthodoxy, well, look at the way they're trying to talk about him. Look at the way they're trying to stereotype him. I mean, if we lived 100 years ago, they'd already be going at him with the pitch fucking forks, or maybe they would have hung the man or shot him or beat him to death, right? So, I mean, come on. Who are the people that are really in charge nowadays, folks? I mean, in Canada, another perfect example. There are 4.1, and we're creeping up to 4.2 million people that work for government in Canada on the federal, provincial, and local levels, which is a huge, substantial number when you consider the fact that if you take people 18 and under and like 70 and older, you're looking at what, 1 in 4, 1 in 5 that work for the government at least. And then if you're in a family, well, that means that, you know, your spouse and your dependents rely on that. So think about what that truly represents. That's a huge, like that's a massive number, folks. Massive in scale and in scope. And out of that 4.1 or almost 4.2 million, women represent 71% of that, right? Not even just a slight majority, but an overwhelming majority. So who's really in power? I mean, even Trudeau, he's a man, as far as we know, right? But he identifies as a feminist. So he's even appealing to that ideology. As the leader of Canada, the highest power you can get as far as political authority, he identifies as, so whether he has the junk down below or not, his ideology is all about feminism. Keep that in mind. Let's deal with the article now. And then it goes on to show a quote. You'd have to ignore a huge amount of settled science in order to repeat the pieties of 1970s era feminism, and yet this is exactly what our leaders continue to do. Bam! The relentless feminist narrative Americans are exposed to every day and have been for decades is that women live in a patriarchy designed to hold them down and back. That egregious analysis of men is simply false. There isn't a shred of hard evidence to support that Western society is pathologically patriarchal. That the prime lesson of history is that men, rather than nature, were the primary source of oppression of women, writes Jordan Peterson in 12 Rules for Life. This lie has been hugely destructive, yet it persists, which means if you've fallen for feminist propaganda, you're not likely to sympathize with the plight of men. If you haven't fallen for it, you will sympathize with men. Problem is, there are far more feminists in power than there are non-feminists in power. Thus, we never hear anything in media other than male bashing. That's what made Carlson's series so utterly refreshing and vitally necessary. So yeah, think about the kind of people that want to go into these positions of authority, whether it's in government or academia or in the media. They would all, or very overwhelmingly, identify as feminists. You're not going to hear the traditional woman or the conservative types or the conservative females that are going into these positions. So exactly, this is very much correct. This is actually a very astute analysis in regards to the kind of people, the kind of women that want to go into these positions of authority. In addition to selling the lie that American women are oppressed, feminists also want Americans to reject male and female nature, and they convince them by twisting bits and pieces of facts to their advantage. Feminism means dismantling society's toxic ideas about what fatherhood looks like. So it's socially acceptable for a woman to be the primary breadwinner while a man stays at home with his kids, writes Emma Roller at Splinter in response to Fox's Men in America series. It means ending mental health stigmas so that men can go to therapy before they feel like they must resort to domestic violence or suicide. It means tearing down rape culture, which hurts women but often hurts men in more insidious ways too. Ultimately, it means dismantling gender completely. Yeah, that's another thing actually before I continue on. It's something I wanted to point out in multiple videos, and I don't think I quite clarified it yet. It's like, and my wife kind of talks about this stuff with me as well. It's like, why is it the women's role, like being a mother, a nurturer, you know, that loving mother that helps raise her child that she gave birth to and stays at home and that staple parent as far as doing what is needed and what is necessary to create a very well-adjusted child. You know, this is the thing I hear a lot today. You know, they talk about women have to go into the workforce, but it's like, think about the fucking kids. Somebody's got to be there for them. If you suggest it's going to be some stranger or some daycare center where there's a bunch of them, you're literally not actually thinking properly about what's good for a child. And at the same time, you're basically telling women that their natural role, you know, what their biology, what being a human female is all about is somehow that's a bad thing. And the only way you're ever worth anything is if you're akin to a male. I mean, that's feminist today is like you're actually, it seems very much anti-female. And more all about being more competitive with men, being more all about men themselves. It's like they're trying to replicate or mirror what it is to be a man. Can't you just have fucking some self-respect, some dignity, and appreciation for just all the beautiful things that it is to be a woman, to be a mother, to be a sister, to be a wife? Why is that always treated as a bad thing? And if you look at these kind of people, I mean, look at how they dress, look at their hairstyle. I mean, you know, it's kind of a bit stereotyped one to suggest now, but look at these people. They seemingly all want to be men. It's like they don't even like themselves in their own skin as women. Terrible, terrible, terrible thing. Terrible thing, especially for the young girls growing up, right? I mean, think about these young girls. They're basically teaching these young girls that, oh, it's terrible to be a woman. You should be a man instead. Oh, the fuck. And there it is. Dismantling gender completely. I'm so glad Roller put that on the record. I've been explaining for years that this is feminists' ultimate goal. And not everyone believes me. What feminists want is for men and women to cease being men and women and to instead become unisex, androgynous, interchangeable beings. That will never happen, of course, which means feminists will continue to perpetuate the gender war they've begun, which in turn means men will continue to suffer. Thank you, Susan Vanker, for writing this article, because it's something that, like I said, it's something that needs to be said by a lot of people. And you got like Cassie J out there that's doing the same kind of thing. She was actually one of those people that identified as a feminist for many years of her life until she started hearing an alternative story and started dealing with men and hearing what their concerns and their plights and some of the ways that they're oppressed in many areas, in many regards, in regards to the social, political, or economic realms. And she has basically changed her concept and now rejects the very premise, the very concept, the very ideology of feminism for the very same reasons. It's an ideology that seems to hate women and kind of hates men too, but want to almost emulate men or be superior to men. So once again, I'm going to reiterate, I'm sure Susan, as a woman, and just like myself, yeah, it's not against women. It's not against women. I love women. I love my wife. I love my mother. I love my grandmother. I love a lot of women. And those are just the ones that I care about tremendously. And there's others that have been around my life or I've associated over the course of my life that I have a tremendous amount of respect for them. So it's not anti-women. It's anti-feminism, right? It's anti an ideology that's trying to separate, divide, and destroy the relationship between men and women. It's a Canadian Libertarian, and I love liberty.